Hello, everyone. This is Coach Matt for the Seattle Chess School. And in this particular video, we are going to make a case for the Ruy Lopez exchange with 5d4. The way that we achieve this position, going back to the beginning, is e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, a6. This is the move that we're going to try to fight against in a most direct way, most concrete way, by simply capturing on c6. Of course, bishop to a4 is another move, and that will be another video in the future. Pawn takes bishop, and now here, the most popular move is castling. This is the move that Bobby Fischer popularized in the 1960s. Here at the Seattle Chess School, Coach Bill is a huge fan of the castlings in this particular position. We are going to try to make a case for the extremely old d4. Now, this particular variation does not have a great reputation. This move, even in the chess books, is considered inferior. The computers essentially agree with this particular assessment. So as far as appealing to authority here, most people will say that, and most electronic equipment will say that d4 is not quite as good as castling. The reason why I want to make a case for d4 is that it allows white to go for a very basic and direct plan, which is to achieve a king and pawn endgame. And so, for example, in this position, the most common move here is to simply capture the pawn. And here we are intending to capture back with the queen, which will immediately set up a queen trade. Queen takes d4, knight takes d4, and we achieve this position. Now here, the good things about this position for black is that they have the bishop pair, and not much is in front of the bishop, so they can be placed pretty much at will. Black also has queenside castling as a plan, which means the rook will be extremely good on the d file. What is not good in their position is the pawn structure. When we capture on c6 on move 4, we have set up black's pawns in such a way that they have a 4-3 majority on the queen side. But since these two pawns here are doubled, black has a very difficult time trying to convert not convert, but actually try to promote a pawn on this side of the board. On the other side, white has a 4-3 majority, but white's pawns are healthy and straight, which means that in a king and pawn endgame, these pawns have an extremely good chance, probably over 90% chance of achieving a pass pawn, which will give basically a winning endgame. Okay, so this is the dream position for this particular opening variation. One where the pawns have not changed at all. The pawns are still healthy and straight. These pawns are still doubled, but all the big pieces have been exchanged off. In this particular position, the 4 versus 3 on the king's side gives white extremely good winning chances based on the fact that they have a candidate pass pawn and have extremely great chances, possibly even forcibly winning this particular position just based on the pawn ending. So this means that what we must do in this particular opening variation is to make trades. We want to trade off rooks. We want to trade off the one bishop we have left. We want to trade off both knights. We also want to trade in such a way that our pawns do not get damaged. For example, if this pawn for some reason actually captures, like the bishop, which will normally be coming to e3, if it gets captured by something in such a way that white has to take back with the f pawn and end up with double isolated e pawns, this will destroy this particular plan. What will also not help out is if black can actually win one of the queenside pawns at some point. If we, for some reason, if we're not careful and we blunder a pawn, black will then suddenly have chances to promote as well, because they will then have a 4-2 majority on the queen side and much better chances to make a queen themselves. Also, in these kind of positions, it is okay to actually trade a kingside pawn as long as the pawns don't get damaged thereupon. For example, if for some reason black played f5 at some point and we traded e for f and ended up with a 3-2 majority on the king side, this still gives us winning chances in king and pawn endgames. All right, now let's go back to the regular position. And here we are. All right, so d4 is the move that we're plumping for here, attempting to trade queens as a precursor to trading all of the pieces and getting a king and pawn endgame. All right, now in this position, black typically has one other way to avoid capturing on d4 in this position, and that is the move bishop to g4. This one has some fans to it. And here we will get into a different type of an end game, but one where we will actually have an extra pawn to play with in addition to having an end game. So if they play bishop to g4, d takes e5 is recommended, allowing the queen trade. Queen takes queen, king takes queen. So now we cannot castle at all. And in some situations, black can capture on f3, for example. They could do it right now. And on g takes f3, we have an extra pawn, but we do not have the healthy and straight pawns that we had before. We have an isolated and we have two sets of doubles, but we have an extra pawn, which is an excellent consideration. We also have a 5-3 majority on the king side. So this means that we can still make a pass pawn later on in the end game. Also, because the queens have been traded, simply hiding the king out on a light square such as e2, black neither has a light bishop or a queen to bother that king with. So just because we can't castle, this isn't going to upset us at all. So this particular variation, I would not consider very critical. The only critical line that black can play here is to actually go in with our wishes, which is to take on d4, queen takes d4, queen takes queen, knight takes queen. And here is where black has generally a few options, but one major good one, which is bishop to d7. So this will be considered the main line. Two other lines that have been played before. One of them is to play bishop c5 straight away. Bishop c5 does develop a bishop and it attacks the knight at the same time. However, after bishop to e3, we will be attempting to go for a setup that I will talk about with bishop to d7, which we will call our main setup, our main battle plan, which is to eventually play queenside castle. But first of all, I wanted to mention on bishop c5, we will just simply develop the bishop on e3 to defend the knight. This sets up discovery powers onto the undefended bishop on c5. And we are still intending to play knight c3, castles queenside with pawn to f3. This is going to be our basic setup here. And the difference between this and the variations where white castles short is that when white castles long, the ability to exchange off all the rooks becomes a lot easier. Black will also, generally speaking, castle queenside, and when both sides do this, this will allow the rooks to trade itself off on the d file, and when the other rook comes over, eventually to d1, and the other rook comes over to d8. We can swap off all 4 rooks a lot easier than we can if you castle short. Okay, so bishop c5 will, and generally speaking, when black puts the bishop on c5, the bishop is a little bit more of a target than it is in other variations where the bishop goes to d6 or b4. The other move is pawn c5, attacking the knight directly. Now, generally speaking, when this knight is attacked, we will have 3 choices. One is to back up to b3 and put some pressure on c5. We can also back up to f3 in some cases. We can also back up to e2, which I would say out of all the moves, knight e2 gives a little bit more flexibility to white's position than any other move. So just simply playing knight to e2 in this position, the knight can go to g3, it can go to f4, it can support a bishop going to f4, it will guard a knight coming to c3. It's just a good flexible piece. These variations are not nearly as popular as bishop to d7, however. So this is the absolute main move. Now, the idea with bishop to d7 is that it makes for an extremely quick queenside castle, and then we can black can be flexible with his kingside pieces. Sometimes the knight can go to f6, sometimes it can go to e7, the bishop can go to d6 or b4, or in some cases c5, but like I said, it's a big target out there on c5. All right, now here, this is where white is also going to set up their pieces in such a way that white will also castle queenside, so that this way the rooks on d1 and d8 will be looking at each other. So this means that we should play a combination of knight c3 and bishop to e3. Now, I don't know if there's too much difference in the 2 moves. Like, we could play bishop to e3 first, or we could play knight to c3 first. Generally speaking, in the games that I have played, I've kind of liked knight c3 more. The knight is always going to go to c3, but this bishop might not always go to e3. In some cases, we might go to f4. We might go to d2 if needed. But generally speaking, the bishop will go to e3 anyway, but this knight will almost always go to c3, so we might as well just play it. So this develops our knights in a very normal and classical way. And here, black castles. So this puts the rook on a good square, of course. And it also has the king coming over, defending the queenside pawns. This is why I was mentioning, in some cases, bishop f4 could be played, which will put pressure on c7. And then black will castle on the queenside, defending the pawns with the king, which is actually fairly good piece placement for black. And then we play bishop to e3. So this is our the start of our basic setup. And in fact, adding 2 more moves, pawn f3 and castles, is the starting position of this particular variation. And from that position, we again are striving to exchange off pieces. Now, at this moment on move 9, this is where black has many options, but our battle plan is going to be basically the same against every variation. There will be some technical details, however, depending on how black plays. For example, if black plays knight f6 in this exact position, developing the knight to a seemingly normal square, this not only puts pressure on e4, in some cases it threatens to play knight to g4, which if black can exchange the knight for the bishop and force white to take with the pawn, this will ruin the overall strategy of our the strategy that we're trying to play for here, which is try to get a king and pawn endgame with a healthy kingside majority. So in these kind of positions, whenever knight to g4 is being threatened, we will just simply play f3. This guards the pawn and this square forever, and we will still castle queenside and then resume trading. So we don't ever have to worry about that. But what we don't want to do in this position is castle right away and allow knight to g4, even though this is part of our plan and this is what we're going to play for. We don't want to allow certain tricks. Okay, so so this is okay. So another particular move that is somewhat popular is bishop to b4. Now here, this seems like an unpleasant pin, and we have to do something um, more defensive in order to prevent bishop takes c3. Now, I've actually seen some players in this position actually castle anyway. So I kind of wanted to just bring this up just briefly here. The idea is that if black chooses to damage the pawns like this, uh, of course, these pawns all look extremely weak now, but at the same time, black's majority still really can't promote through these pawns. So even if we get into a position where all the back row pieces were traded and we get into a king and pawn endgame, black would still not be able to force one of these pawns through to make a queen. So that's actually quite good for white. The other thing is that black gave up their bishop pair in order to damage the pawns like this. So this means that we we don't have to deal with the pair of Bs. One drawback I would say about this position is that now the bishops that are surviving this position are now opposite color, which means that they cannot attack each other. And if we trade down into a bishop and an opposite color bishop endgame, even though we have a kingside majority, it'll be extremely hard to win those types of endings. Okay, but nevertheless, I guess in the hands of an endgame specialist, for those of you that like to trade pieces and get into endgame, this is something that could possibly be worth exploring. Since we're trying to play for endgames anyway, trying to forcibly achieve an endgame might be worth a go. Now, if you don't like the looks of those types of pawns, but still want to try to trade pieces anyway, the move to play in these kind of situations is knight d e2. This is a retreating move, but it does guard the knight in a very normal way. And we're also just going to castle and resume our plan. But now, if black ever captures on c3, we're going to take back with the knight. So this way we can get the bishop pair from our opponent and not have any of our pawns be damaged. So this is a typical move that you will see, this is one that I would recommend on any bishop to b4s. Okay, so knight f6 is a move, bishop to b4 is a move. Another move in these kind of positions, which is played in various move orders, is the move f6. Instead of knight to f6, they play pawn to f6. This one is is slightly more defensive, but it's also a decent waiting move. In my opinion, just simply going back to castles and f3 is a reasonable way for white to set up as well. Black is setting up a little bit more carefully, and also f6 is designed to maybe slow down white's majority. So if white tries to play for e5, black will have something to capture back with. So we would still play a move like f3 followed by castles. Of course, as usual, if black plays bishop to b4, we will take a timeout move like this, and then try to play for castling. Here we might notice that black could play a move like bishop to e6 to slow down castling, but even here we could play either rook to d1, although rook to d1 might run into bishop to takes a2. So there might even be some tactical nuances here. But even so, since we're trying to trade off pieces on the d file, here we could even play a move like king to f2. And this way we could put rooks on the d file and still trade them off, which is kind of the whole point. So we even have these as options. All right, so f6 is a move. Okay, now one of the older moves that has been played, even by a grandmaster as strong as Paul Keary's, is the move rook to e8. So this takes the rook off the d file straight away, but it puts some pressure on the e pawn. Now here the technical detail is that we don't necessarily want to play f3. in these kind of positions, because if f3 is played, suddenly our bishop on e3 is not guarded. And since the rook is here lined up on all of this, this gives black some extra possibilities, such as pawn to f5, trying to rip open the e file. In some cases, if there's a knight on f6, then the move knight d5 can be a nice resource for black, because if white takes with the pawn, then we're exchanging knight for the bishop. So what I would recommend on rook to e8 is to not necessarily play f3 right away. And here, of course, a good preparatory move is just simply castling like this. Let's see. So, and then typically the main move in this position is bishop to b4. So this is the game Vasily Smyslov versus Paul Keres from the 1940s. In this particular game, as usual, when the bishop is attacking the knight, if we don't want to get into any positions where our pawns are beat up, we should play knight de2, just simply defending the knight in the most, the normal way. And then here, Keres played f5. And this led to eventually it led to a draw. Here I would like to point out that after e takes f, bishop takes f, in this position, white played a3, which is a perfectly normal move, either encouraging black to capture or to retreat onto d6 or e7, wherever they want to go. There is a slightly newer move that I would like to recommend here in this position instead of a3, and that is knight to g3, resuming the trade plan, attacking the bishop. Of course, the bishop can run, but here, this is one of these positions where white has got a 3-2 majority now. So we still want to go into a king and pawn endgame, but now instead of a 4-3, we have a 3-2. So this will still be a winning plan if we can ever achieve the trading of pieces. Now that the board is more open, I would venture to guess that trading pieces would be a little bit easier here. All right, so let's back up a couple of moves. Rook to e8 is not only another option here. Let's see. Okay, so another move would be bishop to d6, which is a move that Alexander Alyokin it recommended a long time ago, and his recommendation was just to play for a plan with knight ge7 followed by rook to e8 with promising play. All right, so here on bishop to d6, we should still stick with our plan, castle, knight to e7. Now here we don't necessarily have to play f3 right away. The pawn isn't under attack, and nor is there a knight coming to g4. So here in this position, I would recommend the book moves, which is just simply knight to b3. The idea with this move is that when knight to c5 is being played, this is trying to trade off the c5 knight for the d7 bishop. And in order to avoid it, well, if they want to avoid it, they would have to actually back up to e8, which does interrupt their development scheme. Knight to g6, knight c5, like this, for example. So in this position, black has got some options of either saving the bishop but disconnecting the rooks, or allowing this particular trade, which will deprive black of the bishop pair. And I think this gives white a reasonable position. Now, by the way, if you put any of these positions onto Stockfish here, it always gives black some slight advantages. So, and of course, this can be believed, but at the same time, in this kind of position, it is white that has a plan. White has got a very clear, concrete plan of just trading off. And so not only does black actually have to avoid that plan, but they also have to avoid that plan of trading off pieces by putting their pieces on good squares. If they are unable to do that, then this will definitely favor white in these positions. Okay, so let's back up to here. So castle, bishop to e3. Okay, so another move in this position is to play knight e7 straight away without moving the dark square bishop. This one also has some fans. People play this knight e7 move. Again, we would just simply castle as usual. And then on knight to g6, uh, just simply f3. And again, we've achieved our basic battle formation, and we shall await developments. In these kind of positions, a lot of waiting moves can be played by both sides, usually using the flank pawns, a3, h3, h4, h5 for black, a5 for black, g3. These types of moves can be played if you are stuck, or if you just simply want a waiting move and you want to see what your opponent is up to. But in my opinion, black has not really stopped white from setting up their basic battle plan here with this. Another common resource for white in these positions is to play the move rook to d2, which not only helps guard the pawns on the second rank, but it also helps with doubling. So this way we can trade off our rooks even faster now. Okay, so let's see, bishop to e3. So we have knight f6, knight e7, bishop d6. If black in this position chooses to play c5 now, again, as we see by the highlighted green dots, white can actually move to any of the squares depending on what you want. Each move does different things. Knight to b3 hits the c pawn twice. Knight to f3 threatens knight e5 and knight g5 as tactical moves. Knight e2 is again our flexible knight move that we can use, just setting up castling and getting on with the business of trading. All three of these I think are perfectly good against the c pawn move. All right, now there is a move here, g6. This has been recommended in some chess books based on a game of Capablanca's where he played like this. Also, there was a game of Artur Yusupov who played g6 in this position. And here we should also play castles. However, I think knight de2 is okay because the bishop is going to come to g7 anyway, and so we will eventually have to retreat, especially if black plays a c5 or something like that. So retreating now and then just simply castling again gives us our basic plan. The only difference here is that on knight to e7, I would not recommend the bishop to d4 move that was played in the main game of Artur Yusupov's. In my opinion, just simply sticking to the plan with f3 and waiting for something to happen is a little bit better. Just simply going here, and we might not necessarily play bishop to d4, even though that would trade off the dark square bishops. It is a little bit better here to play solidly. And then again, we're setting up like maybe a rook to d2. Maybe we're setting up maybe going back to d4 with the knight. We might actually play d4 on any sloppy moves that white plays. We also might just centralize our pieces with rook he1. We also can play some plans with h4, not with the idea of a pawn storm, generally speaking, but just a possible way to get the h1 rook into the game. But I would recommend this move f3. All right. Back to the main position. And I believe that is all the different moves that can be played here. Anything bizarre that is happening here, like knight h6 or pawn b6 or a5 or something like that, we should still stick with the plan of castling long, pawn to f3, and then try to trade off pieces. All right, now, so these are the moves. This is the basic idea with this particular variation, all the different ideas. I'm going to make a second video here showing this to show this type of line in action. And hopefully you guys will have a nice new weapon to use against the Ruy Lopez. And for those of you that like end games and don't necessarily like complicated positions, even out of the Ruy Lopez, just simply capturing, D4, capturing, trade off queens, get this position. This should give you at least a simple plan to play against, all kinds of players to play for the win. All right, so we will end it with that. This has been Coach Matt for the Seattle Chess School, and I will see you guys on the next one.